Welcome back, everyone, to Vox Markets. My name is Paul Hill, and by popular demand, I am delighted today to be able to speak to Sara Barrington again, the CEO of Verici Dx, a next-generation immuno-diagnostics firm focusing on the global kidney transplant market. So welcome, Sara.
Thank you very much. Great to be back, Paul.
Yeah, no, I noticed on the RNS there's been a lot happening over the last sort of 4 months since we spoke, not least news last week that the company has commenced its clinical validation trials out in the States. But before we sort of dig into the detail of that, can you just give us a sort of like a top level view, a sort of scale of the healthcare crisis caused by sort of chronic kidney disease?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, kidney disease just doesn't have the same kind of headline importance that, say, cancer does. But in fact, it's a bigger problem. So there's about 850 million people worldwide living with what we call chronic kidney disease. That's about $120 billion issue that's for the healthcare systems across the world. You know, if we look at the US, that's 46 million people, and that's about 14% of the population. So, you know, that's no small thing. And then when you look at the death rates, again, you know, the WHO estimate about 5 to 10 million people die annually from kidney disease. Now, if you look at lung cancer, that's the clear leading cause of cancer death. That only I say that's a horrid term, sorry, but they have about 1.8 million. So if you look at kidney disease, that is a huge multiple, you know, compared to oncology. And obviously, I think that the world is sort of waking up to the fact that kidney disease is a large area and it's a big problem area. Now, we're in transplants, and again, it has its own issues. There are about 300,000 people waiting for a transplant worldwide, but only 95 to 100,000 are actually getting them. So if you break that down, very similar between the US and the UK, about 24,000 in the US, 25,000 in the EU. So that is, you know, there is quite clearly an issue of supply. Yeah. And then there's a issue of success. So in the US, each transplant costs, I think they worked it out to be just about under $500,000, about 443,000 per transplant. Now, out of each transplant, you're going to have up to 50%, between 37 and 50% of patients will suffer what they call a rejection event. Now, that's not to say it fails, it's just that they have an event that the clinician needs to deal with. And that does translate into some success, but it also translates into failure. You know, if you look in the EU, you've got a failure rate of between 13 to 21%. That difference, by the way, Paul, is the difference between getting your organ from a deceased donor or a living donor. The living donors are more successful, yeah. And in the US, it's between 16 and 28%. So if we look at the cost of just that failure, in the US, it's about a $10 billion cost of failure. And then when you put that, the fact that patients are going back onto dialysis, which is, you know, not a great quality of life for the patient, that doubles. And so these are large, scary numbers, both for the patients and the healthcare system.
Yeah, I think for investors, it's another data point on the number of, I mean, there's about 2.5 million people who have died of COVID, and we're talking sort of like multiples more for sort of like, you know, from chronic kidney damage. And I think with regards to the transplants, another sort of like data point is that there are a lot more people on dialysis machines who could go onto the waiting list. It's just that the supply of donor parts is so short and so scarce that actually the sort of like the total addressable market, if we could help a lot more people, not just those on the waiting lists, but a lot more even on the dialysis if we did have that availability. Now, for top level, what is actually driving this problem? I mean, I've read that it's a lot of lifestyle, and about a third of all people with sort of like with, you know, obesity and diabetes who then get also kidney damage as well, and that's a sort of like one of the
that's right.
So it's
yeah, I mean, if you look at the kind of lifestyle, as it were, or the underlying health issues from other disease areas, diabetes. Now, they are predicting that the increase in diabetes will reach about 60 million adults in the US by 2060. That's quite a frightening number. And then obviously you've got the cardiovascular sources. And again, you know, that's on the increase. It's quite a lethal disease.
Yeah.
And that's predicted to account for, you know, in 2030, about 1 million deaths. So you're seeing this high rise in underlying causes as well as the kind of genetic areas. So I think that kidney disease, although we're looking for improvements in the area, we're also fighting as just a fundamental shift in the wrong direction from other sources.
Yeah, so I think, so just coming back to sort of the US, and if we've got sort of, I think you mentioned sort of 22,000 transplants of kidneys just in the US each year, etc. If we had technology, one, you could improve reduce the wastage on the number of mismatches and the damage caused by transplant, you know, basically by the immune system in actual patients. Yeah. So, and equally, if you ever could actually increase the supply of donors, whether that is, are there any initiatives in the US to increase the sort of supply of donor parts at all?
Yeah. It's good news that there was an executive order back in 2019. It's called Advancing American Kidney Health, and they came out in support of the entire area. And the good news was. Sorry about that, something on my phone, that they've got a goal to double the supply of transplants. Now, you know, government initiatives, they can be sort of written off as, you know, nice to have and don't really have an impact. But we've seen this in the EU. They actually managed to increase their supply from their government actions about 21% from 2008 to 2015. You know, about 60% of that was kidneys. And that did result in an increase of 17% on transplant surgeries. So, you know, these initiatives are very meaningful. And we're seeing also a push to encourage living donors. Yes. And that's, you know, that's something that we hope to address as well with our test. Obviously, we can't impact the supply. But by making successful grafts more of a possibility, you know, increasing the success, decreasing that failure, is going to encourage living donors. If I'm going to give up a kidney, I want it to be worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess also is such that if you improve the success rate of a particular transplant, it means that person, one, has a better quality of life, no doubt about it, but doesn't go back, as you said, onto the waiting list, which means that somebody else can benefit from a transplant, you know. So effectively you get an increase in the transplants because you get a much more efficient use of people's donor parts, which are in scarce supply, don't you, I guess? So
that's right. Mm-hmm.
So just on the company's tests then, can you just take us through the sort of the three tests? Because you started off with two when we last chatted, and you've added a third, really quite interesting one. So I want to pick your brains on what the opportunity is there and how they fit together.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, you know, and one thing I will say is that there's an entire journey for the patients and their clinician as they go through the transplant experience. And we've got three main tests at the moment, and they're designed to really be pre-transplant, early damage, and late damage. So the early or the pre-transplant is a product that we call Clarava. And that is designed to look at the recipient's immune system and to give the clinician very important information about whether that's likely to be aggressive or benign. So I don't know whether you know, Paul, but essentially the main tool that's available for the clinician is the use of immunosuppressants. They're huge drugs. They suspend the entire immune system for the patient.
Which is not great when it's not great with COVID around either, is it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's underlying to, you know, conditions like, for example, cancer progression and any kind of passing virus or infection. So, you know, at the moment, there's what we, one of our clinicians calls a one-size-fits-all. So what you've got is they'll, post-transplant, they give a very, very high dosage of this and then just try and taper off as quickly as possible. The problem with that is if you don't have the right information, or for that patient, for example, if they've got an aggressive immune system, you want to keep that dosage quite high. You are justified in doing that. The risks do not outweigh the benefits there. So, that's very important information. But if you've got a benign immune system, then that tapering off is justified. Again, then you want to try and reduce that dosage. So, that pre-transplant information about whether it's aggressive or benign, incredibly important. And at the moment, clinicians don't have very much to go on there. They're using what we call broad clinical factors, which are not personalized, they're very generalized. They try and sort of tailor them to the patient, but they've got about a 50-50 chance of getting them right. So again, that pre-transplant information is very important.
And presumably, Sarah, that predictive, that prognosis test you've got there not only helps the clinician post-operation in terms of what level of dosage, how long, but presumably it also informs what the likely success rate of just the match. Because if you've got a really aggressive immune system, then maybe you're probably not going to be the best match. Whereas if you've got a benign immune system, then you're going to have a better chance of success. So it presumably helps the hit rate and then helps the treatment afterwards.
Yeah, it's an interesting comment, and perhaps one that's going to be more relevant when we've managed to double our supply. But, clinicians have such a limited supply right now that they have something called HLA, matching or mismatching. They're trying to look at organs as related to the patient. And to be honest with you, they will put in something that has a higher number of mismatches if they don't have another supply. And so they will manage it through, through post-transplant care.
Okay.
So, I think that's a point for further down the line when supply is a little bit more abundant.
Yes,
but certainly at the moment, and as I keep saying, if we can make that success rate higher, then that's going to encourage more donors.
Yeah, and then the post-operative one, and then the longer-term one for fibrosis. How does that?
That's right. Yeah, so our second one is the Tutiva. So you, in the first sort of, let's say 3 months, to be sort of a broad time scale, there's a great deal of risk from the immune system attacking the graft, causing damage. So that's what we call early damage, and that is something that's sort of addressed by Tutiva. That's a gene signature. It's not only looking at the immune system, but the cell pathways as well, about repair and metabolism and so on and so forth. And so what that is doing is, it's at a very early stage, it's giving highly specific information about what's happening in the kidney at that time. So it's real time and it's early, and it gives the clinician an opportunity, the golden rule of diagnostics or any kind of treatment, which is earlier is better.
Yeah.
I think that it's really important to have that early stage real-time information.
And that allows you personalized, doesn't it? Personalized medicine rather than actually a one-size-fits-all, which is really what they're doing now. They say, well, okay, he looks a bit ill today, so we'll give him a sort of like a lesser dose. Whereas, he's okay today, so we'll give him a good shot, see how he gets on,
Yeah, well, you'll see clinicians be quite frustrated about the lack of information. If they have to use the immunosuppressants and then they're tapering off and then they're looking by damage, it's sort of treatment by damage. It's not really where they want to be. They're not going to go, oh, look, we reduced the dosage too early. So they are looking, they'll say that at the moment they feel that they're flying pretty much blind. And they are really looking for, higher quality information, something that's personal and something that is, really important for, for real-time diagnostics.
Yeah, and then the final one, the fibrosis test, the one you brought your license in as well. That's the longer-term one, is it?
Yeah.
And what exactly is fibrosis? Yeah. Is it basically scar tissue on the kidney or something like that, hardening of it all?
Yeah, that's a good general definition of it. It really is, indicative of a condition that's later stage damage and takes some time to form.
Yeah.
I think we can see, indications of that earlier. And we had some technology around fibrosis, but it wasn't using our core technology, and we were delighted to be able to license that from Mount Sinai. We announced that at the beginning of this year, and then that sort of supports really what we're saying, that this whole technology approach is going to end up being a platform. At the moment we're looking at these 3 individual tests, but as we go forward, you can see the interrelation between them. This is a journey for the patient, and there is information at every step that's really important. And so we're looking at this ultimately to be a kind of platform play.
And there'll be more tests along the way. There'll be next generation of your 3 leading tests. Presumably they'll get sort of better and even more accurate perhaps, but also additional tests that may come in as well. Is that what you're saying, or is it basically just joining all those 3 tests together and providing a sort of platform service?
Yeah, I mean, a bit of both is going to be the answer. The information that we're gathering at the current time. So as we go through this, we are actually sequencing the entire transcriptome. As you know, Paul, biobanking is a critical part in acceleration of healthcare innovation. I'd like to see more of it. It's surprising to me how little there are across the world. We certainly look for biobanks whenever we're looking for something. We'd like to have a data bank of all of this information. The entire transcriptome across all of these patients, for 2 years is going to be incredibly helpful, not only to us, but to our collaborators, because there's a wealth of information here that we haven't tapped. And I see us being able to promote a lot more personalized medicine, not only on the diagnostic side, but on the therapeutics as well. These immunosuppressants at the moment are very broad, very general, and there's always a need to be able to look for much more personalized information. So further down the line, this is going to be a very an incredibly important resource, not only for us but for the industry. We'd like to see this whole area move forward quite rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, again, to investors, I would say if you want an analogy, just look at sort of the cancer treatments, and I would put the current standard of care on the diagnostic side for kidney. It's basically just a bit like chemotherapy was sort of 10 years ago, and they moved to immunotherapies, whereas personalized medicine and hopefully the sort of the kidney side can repeat the feat with a bit of luck. I know this is a new market really, because there's nobody's really sort of started personalized medicine in the sort of the kidney side of it, and it's really sort of coming in. But what are we sort of like looking at for an addressable market, a sort of market sizing for the 3 tests? I did see a sort of figure of about 700 million when the company floated back in November.
Yeah, I mean, this is really hard to sort of quantify, and so we tried our best, and we said, okay, look, this market is absolutely right for monitoring. At the moment, there's a sort of philosophy of a bit of one and done, and that's not where clinicians want to be. They want to use a test multiple times because it is a journey and things change. So we looked at our 2 tests, and we said, okay, if we build in a little bit of monitoring, we look at a lower price point to encourage that, and we look at the numbers, then we came out with 700 million, per annum, right? Obviously much bigger if you look at a 5 or a 10 million year horizon. And then I said, okay, look, there is a growth rate, but nobody really knows what that is. And I think that we just have to point and say, look, there's underlying, we know kidney disease is increasing. We know that there's a push to increase transplants in the supply side. And then we've got COVID. And we know that that's affecting kidney disease as well. And so, once we got to that figure, I just said, look, and then put on your own estimations of growth rates, because if I come up with a figure, we'll all argue about it. But I think that we can just sort of get to a point where we go, it's big.
Yeah, okay.
So and then, I think there's enough opportunity there.
Yeah, and then presumably the $700 million per annum is the first 2 tests. It doesn't even include the fibrosis, does it, I guess?
That's right. So that's just going to increase it by, by a few more million. But, I just, I think, ultimately, I've looked at all of our, other sources of addressable market. and they all come to a sort of rough idea of, yes, this is big and it's growing, and we don't know how quickly it's going to grow, particularly in light of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it would be remiss of me to say not to cover the big news on the clinical validation trial. Can you give us a bit more color on sort of like the sort of timescales, how it's designed, how many patients, what? I mean, you got 3 leading university hospitals out in the States to start on day one. So that was a big. How did you manage to do that for starters?
Well, there is a very high degree of interest in this this approach. You know, Barbara is very well known. Her work was widely published. I mean, her what we might call a pilot study was on about 500 patients, and it was multi-center already. So there's and that's been published already. So I think that there's a high degree of interest in that, and we will expand that. You know, one of the things you need to do is to have a bigger multi-center trial, and one that's more of a validation, a confirmation. And so that's what we're doing right now. We're aiming to have about 12 to 15 centers, and outside the US as well. This has to be much more of a kind of global push. But we were delighted that we were going to just announce first center open, and then we had all 3 of them be able to come together. And very credible.
During a COVID pandemic, I mean, that says a lot, as you say. The interest in your technology has got to be immense, because there's so many different competing priorities in hospitals who haven't got resource. And to start with 3 such leading medical institutions to go ahead with testing, it just says the validation testing just says a massive amount about the quality of the top technology.
Yeah, we were thrilled. I mean, I'm in line with you. There's a couple of centers that we've seen where the clinicians got redeployed in COVID, and some have not come back. So there is, we knew that we would have to talk to more centers than we'd actually end up using because of COVID. But there is still a high degree of interest in moving this part of the disease progression forward. So I was thrilled by that, and I think if you look at our advisory board, Paul, we're very lucky that we've got some very high level, high functioning 5 past presidents of international societies. That's not bad going. Current president of AST. These folks are sort of at the leading edge of this area, and then we've got collaborators who wanted to come on to the board, but sort of stepped aside so that they could actually lead the research effort, so that they could be the PI. And we're seeing that reflected in the quality of centers coming forward into this trial. I think it's all very, very credible interest in seeing this test be successful. The data is what the data is, but at the moment the performance that it's demonstrated to date has been incredibly encouraging.
I'd highlight to investors, to have that who's who of the kidney world on your advisory board is just phenomenal, and a massive endorsement of the technology. Just on the clinical validation test, when are you expecting sort of first results to come through? Is it sort of the end of this year, I recall?
Yeah, that's right. So, the first 2 tests are reasonably short timeline. So we're aiming to have that done, roughly about the end of the year. We'll have all our samples in, and then we'll do our analysis. And then, obviously next year we'll look to publish on that. So that's this year. But we're keeping the clinical trial open for the fibrosis product. That's a longer. We follow patients for 24 months. So that's further down the line, but these centers have signed up to do all 3 products. Being able to come out with Clarava and Tutiva initially obviously puts us on a firm commercial footing. And so that's something that we're pushing ahead with. So that's going to be very exciting this year.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say also, doing that 3rd test as well will just build more barriers to entry, because it gives you that time advantage, doesn't it? I guess. Just assuming that there is the confirmatory or the validation tests prove in line with what the indicative tests were before, and there's a step change in sort of like predictive and the sort of success rates for transplants on the diagnostic side. what is the commercialization strategy then? You've got first revenues, I think, next year, and then you've got proper commercialization, but you obviously need to get sort of like insurance cover somewhere along the line, don't you, I guess?
Yeah, that's right. So there's two approaches, as you know. The US has kind of one system, the EU slightly different. So, and we'll be going into both. But if I can talk about the US, so there's a couple of regulatory pathways. One's called the clear approval, and that's where you have a test that's run in your own lab, and you just give out a result. And obviously, this testing modality lends itself extremely well to that. So we're going down the clear pathway, and that's what I would call our critical pathway. You can also go down the FDA pathway, and you know, obviously at the moment that's a little bit more confounded by the impact of COVID on the agency. So you know, that's an alternative and can be very much a parallel path. Once you've got your regulatory pathway, and you'll see from our announcements that we decided to accelerate our opening of our clear lab and get that approval this year rather than next year, so that we're all ready for the publication. Once we have done that, then you're starting to think about reimbursement. That's effectively the insurance coverage, and you've got the private payers and you've got the Medicare. Most of transplant care is on Medicare, but there's quite a bit that still comes out of the private payer world. And you'll see us put the foundations in for that. You have to go through, you know, your trial and your regulatory pathway before you can really address those. But we're already looking at putting in some of those foundations, some of the filings, some of the study designs, some of the, you know, case studies. And, you know, we're also looking at the health economics, you know, behind all of that, which is really important to the private payers, not so much to Medicare, but certainly to the private payers. So all of those building blocks are things that we can do this year to put us firmly on that path for those two first products. And then, of course, you know, we just, you know, repeat and rinse as you go with each product that you bring out there afterwards.
Yeah, and if it's a step change in the in sort of the diagnosis for the kidney transplants, which everybody, you know, assumes it's going to be, I mean, what will be the sort of shape of the adoption curve from 2023 onwards? I mean, if it becomes such a, you know, it's a breakthrough technology, then presumably the adoption curve will be reasonably rapid. I know you've got to roll it out, but given most of the advisory board know where the transplant centers are in the US, then it should be reasonably quickly, just one phone call.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, obviously there are you know, blood tests that have come before us that I think have really proven the need for this area to move away from biopsies into a blood-based testing or urine-based testing, but certainly an easier modality. And we saw quite a rapid adoption from them, even though they have problems. And, you know, clinicians, they're very good on what we call a rule-out test. You know, performance wasn't as specific as ours in terms of a rule-in, you know, what's my actionable data? And I think that's why we're seeing quite a lot of interest, and gives me confidence that we have quite a lot of difference there, that there will be a rapid adoption of this technology where we're giving highly real-time specific information that's really useful to the clinician, you know, in terms of that transplant success.
Yeah, and also I'm sort of like, just over the last week or so, I've read that there's some urine-based sort of like diagnostics testing coming out. I mean, presumably that's going to just help the adoption of this new sort of an immuno-diagnostic sort of like concept. And
that's right.
How do you see that sort of, is it basically just going to accelerate the whole adoption of this whole area, a bit like immunotherapy and chemo?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I was delighted to see some of these progressions in the marketplace. I think it really validates this kind of underlying approach. It's very high performing. It's very, you know, it sort of proves the point that this is the area that you want to look for diagnostics, because it's really the area that's affecting the transplant. So I was delighted to see that. We see it as highly complementary. And we see this as sort of moving the entire field forward, you know, all boats floating, you know, is the expression really. So I'm very excited to see some of this emerging now out in the conferences and in papers.
Yeah, and then the business raise, was it £14 million in November? What is it all being spent on the validation test? Is that the idea, and sort of like just getting the business through the approvals and initial sort of like sort of like bits and pieces are surrounding that? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this year as being my foundations. You should look and see what I'm doing as very much, oh, good, another foundation block has gone in. And I said, when we did the IPO, we would be back for commercial expansion, but this would be putting all the foundation blocks in for that initial commercial proof of concept. Okay, the validation trials, the stuff that you need to do for your reimbursement, collaborations, brand awareness, education packages, all of those things that, each part may be not particularly exciting as a standalone, event, but you put it all together and you realize you've built the foundation for that commercial expansion. And so this is a critical year. That's what we said we would spend the money on, and that indeed is what we are spending the money on. Yeah,
okay. And again, I would highlight to investors, just on a sort of like a valuation layer on it, if Verici Dx only managed to get sort of 10% of its addressable market, that's pre the fibrosis level, and that means $70 million of revenue, say, I don't know, 5-6 years time, 10 times multiple. That's sort of like 70 million plus market cap, dollar cap, and that 500 million pounds market cap compared to what you currently is 100 million. So there's a big opportunity there, no doubt about it. And we really hope you successful in those in that validation trials. What is the sort of news flow that people should sort of like frame themselves over the next sort of 12 months for the rest of this year?
Yeah, very much these foundation blocks. Look for those. So, as we roll out our clinical validation studies, and seeing those, obviously we're looking at the EU. That will follow the US and any other kind of global aspects. And then, we're looking at other foundation blocks. What are we doing in terms of our commercial launch, the clear lab approvals, the reimbursement, aspects, and any kind of collaborations, anything that really supports the launch of the brands, the credibility of the test, everything that we need for commercial launch.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got so much, going on in terms of, sort of in-house. It's just as a sort of left field sort of idea, given you've got a massive sort of like, bank of information there on the immuno-diagnostics for sort of like transplants. I did see in the US, total transplants are about sort of 37,000. And that's sort of different. You put heart and liver in there on top of the sort of the kidney and stuff. I mean, presumably the immune system impacts other bodily parts which are transplant. Is there any way of potentially licensing out some of that biobank, or is it really just the company's is obviously just going to concentrate on kidney for the time being?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a balance when you're growing a company. Do I, do I keep on my critical path? How much do I diversify? How much does that, scare investors that you've lost focus? So, one of the things I'm going to be very clear about, we will not lose focus on our critical path. We are moving very much full steam ahead on that. But that's not to say that we won't look at alternatives and bringing them in to complement that. There are other sort of transplant diseases, but there are actually other disease types as well. The autoimmune system disease groups are likely to respond very much to that. So again, if there are things that we can pull in that are going to be very complementary, we will do. But obviously, it can't disrupt the critical path to commercialization on these first products.
Yeah, and I guess if a big diagnostics firm came knocking on the door to want to better license your technology, you would open the door, at least have a chat to them anyway.
In this field, you never close a door. So
exactly, yeah. Well, very much thanks for your time again, Sarah. Absolutely fascinating to hear how the business is looking forward, and really hope wish you the best over the next sort of like few months.
Great. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thank you.